So I thought in this video we'd take a look at this HAKKO 48 or this HAKKO FR-300 desoldering gun. It's a handheld desoldering gun. I need to service it, so let me take you through, show you the pieces. I think we've looked at this briefly in another video. What we have is the desoldering nozzle. Actually contacts the point to be desoldered. There's of course a heating element inside of the tool. There's a tip here that's actually used to touch the item to be desoldered. There's a little hole in it that the solder is sucked up through. There's of course a sleeve that holds it together. So there is a cartridge up here on top that collects the solder. There's a little removable fixture there. So the idea is you touch the point to be desoldered, the solder heats up, you pull the trigger, it draws a vacuum, and the molten solder is pulled up through the center hole and collected in this bin. And the vacuum of course is drawn from the back side here. And we'll look at the filter element as well. So this little tip does become plugged up. There's a little cleaning device here. At the moment it is plugged up. Not uncommon. It may have to be heated to actually break the solder and it loose. Yeah, it's bunged up pretty well. I have had a couple of times to use a small screw or a drill bit to actually clean that out, and I may have to do that again just to break up what's in there. If I didn't clean this properly last time I shut it off, I should have drawn all the solder and everything out, and I didn't. And of course that's my own fault for not servicing the tool correctly. I've got some small bits here, and I'll see if I can get in there and just simply break that little bit of solder that's in there loose. That's too large a little drill bit. Just see if we can turn through there and break up that loose solder that's in there, which we've just done. So that little bit of a plug I had in there has been cleaned out. There's little bits of loose solder all over the work surface there. You put these little bits away. We'll get back the little hand cleaning tool and just make sure that we are clean, which we are. The next piece of course is the tube that runs through the heating element, and I suspect I've got a nice solder mess in the end of it as well, and of course I do. And again, this is my own fault for not cleaning this properly last time I turned it off. But we've been able to break through here. You can see the cleaning tool popping through on the other side. So we've loosened up most of the stuff in that channel. It's not as clean as I'd like it to be, but maybe you can see what's falling out the end there. So we can go ahead and put the tip back on. There's a little tool here that's used to engage the tip. The tip twists and locks in, and we get a nice solid connection. Let me set the tool out of the way, and we'll look at the little connection or collection device here. Down inside there's a lot of dead solder from the last bit of desoldering I did. There's a large amount of it in there. There's a little filter element here on the back side that we'll talk about in a second. Let's see if we can knock that out of there. So this is all the solder from the last time I desoldered something here. This has got just lots of little bits and pieces of solder down inside of it that can just be cleaned out. This could probably be cleaned better, but So what happens is this little steel plate sits down inside of here, and of course it's always a pain to get in. Sits down inside of here like this. There's a filter that sits behind. The solder is drawn through the tip into the chamber here. It tends to hit that little metal plate there and cool off and turn into kind of this slag. And then there's a little filter that sits behind that collection point that ends up on this end where the vacuum is drawn to keep the smoke and the particles and dust from getting into the little vacuum motor in the handle here. In this case, this little filter is beyond shot. I mail ordered some. Actually, let me clean some of the mess here off. Actually need to dispose of this properly. Not that that was properly, but it is disposed of. Bring back our little work surface here. So I ordered up some replacement ceramic pads, and these are actually thinner than what I was expecting. These are normally in the space of about this thick, a little bit thicker, so I'm just going to simply put 2 or 3 of these back in here. These don't seem to fit as well as I'd like. These just plain may be the wrong ones. That gives a nice little... So I think I've determined these really are the wrong ones, so I'm not going to reuse these. That's a shame. I'll need to get on the web and order the correct ones. So I will have to reuse what I have available here. So what I'll do is what I've done in the past. You can see where the vacuum's been drawn through and this outer surface has just gotten really nasty and contaminated. I will peel that outer surface off. Just pull that layer off. I'll take this other one here that's pretty dirty and peel its outer layer off as well. Oops. Helps to have a little catch down in there. This is always a bit of a trick to get in, because it's got to fall down in place correctly, and it doesn't always like to do that. Oh, come on, there you go. Well, as you can see, it should be nice and simple. And I'm going to add this second piece here behind as well. The filter in the back, this simply sits down inside of here. We release it and we have the tool put back together. I've mentioned safety with this tool a couple times before. There's this little metal sleeve that when you lay it down, since I don't have a stand for it, it just keeps the tip somewhat protected. On the tool itself, there is a adjustment down here for the tip temperature, which can go from 350 to 500 degrees C. Of course, the power control on the back and the hand activated turn the vacuum on. The idea is here is that the tip gets hot. You get to the solder point to be unsoldered. You heat it up till the solder flows, and then you pull the trigger here. Pull the trigger to draw the vacuum and pull the solder off. We'll go ahead and unsolder a few components off of this board to demonstrate. So the desoldering tool has come up to temp. And the idea here is we get over a pin, let the solder melt for a second, and draw the solder out. That pin cleaned out very nicely. And we just work our way along. The pins to be desoldered. So we've had a few pins that did not desolder well, and I'm going to re-wet them with some fresh solder and hit them again. So as I mentioned a second ago, there were 3 pins that did not desolder well. I'm going to reflow these with fresh solder. No surprise, one of these was on the ground over here. And there was one here that actually surprised me that should have came clean just fine. So I've added some fresh solder on those 3 pins. And I'm going to come back and let him flow a little better, and that cleaned out just fine that time. And that one did. I can actually see another pin that didn't desolder well. I'm going to let a little more time happen on the ground here. That cleared out just fine. And let me touch this last pin right here. Just flow it with some fresh solder. By adding some fresh solder, you actually give the tip here something to melt, and hopefully get it to melt through. So I believe all of those pins have become unsoldered. It's not unusual for me to actually have the part fall out, although on this board obviously it's not going to do that for us. And like that, I believe the part's completely loose. And there it is. I don't know if you can see fully down through the holes there, but it's done a nice job of clearing all those holes. This chip has been pulled out, and the leads on it are nice and clean. So trying to do this with a different tool, such as a solder vac tool here. Slide this back out of the way, is a lot more work. I will try to desolder a couple of pins here. Reheat the joint, hopefully. And that hole seemed to clean reasonably well. And of course we can work our way along here. I find desoldering this way, I tend to have to add fresh solder to every pin first. Although I'm having reasonable luck here. This is a lot slower and a lot clumsier. Another possibility, of course, is solder wick. I've got some lost here on the bench someplace. You know what I'm talking about, huh? I wonder where a couple of rolls of solder wick ended up. And the idea being, see if I can find something somewhat large on here to try to unsolder. But the idea being, you potentially have to add a little flux. So I want to, if I get the flux pin to open, I want to remove the solder on these couple of pins. I just added a lot of flux. I meant to only add a little bit. I want to be careful. That is still hot, and I take my solder braid. I've got a relatively small tip here. And the idea is to heat sufficiently to draw the solder up into the wick, and of course the wick's getting hot on my fingertips here. I'm not sure how well that did or didn't work. Looks like it didn't work very well at all. Didn't work very well at all. I will actually add a bit of fresh solder back to these. Just to give the gun here something to bite into. And we'll see if we can get these couple of parts unsoldered. The pins are bent over on these, so So I'm also using the tool to try to straighten the pin out a bit. And of course, that diode and resistor were released pretty simply. Tool definitely makes the job a lot easier and a lot quicker. I've used it a large amount over the years. It was expensive, but it was a really good investment. And if you're going to seriously reclaim parts, works very well for it. Of course, the part rolled out of the way, as they always do. Come here. I don't know if you noticed, but that part simply fell off the board and rolled away. It doesn't, the tip in this is actually pretty small, and so getting on large pins such as this transformer can be a bit of a problem. And just like that, that little matching transformer is pulled out. So you can see it makes a pretty easy job here. I don't know what this device here is. It almost looks like it might be a relay of some kind. Device is loose here and just falls right out. Hamlin, no idea what it is. You know, I don't know that there's a whole lot else on here we're salvaging. It looks like there's a couple of op amps up here, some opto isolators. I've already kind of removed everything from this board I wanted to salvage off. I don't tend to reclaim electrolytic capacitors. They age and dry up. That's actually a small MOV there. I might as well pull that small MOV off. That's, MOVs can be useful. Well, it just fell right out. See, not a whole lot else on here that I need to reclaim. A second board that come out of this that's already been stripped as well. This was an old TTY device for the deaf. It had a really nice vacuum fluorescent display in it. It was dead. As you can see, I've done a pretty good job reclaiming this. The VFD's been pulled off. The drivers, there was a printer. The printer driver chip has been pulled off. Stuff left on here is really just CMOS logic and TTL logic. You know, somebody might want to try to reclaim these large diodes. This tip really won't work well for this. Although, I guess with a bit of patience you can make it work. Because the device lead doesn't fit up into the hole, of the tip here, you don't really get as good a draw on these large pins from the vacuum. I believe they make tips with a little bit larger diameter that would work for something like this. Like I say, we've kind of hit the limits of the tip I have on the tool. I'm sure none of those diodes came loose. Yeah. And of course, not unexpected, this would be a case if I really wanted to reclaim these, excuse me, I would be using the hand tool here to do that. Anyhow, there's a quick talk through the FR-300 desoldering station. Let me go ahead and just clean all of the... Anyway, remaining bits of solder out of here. So the next time I turn it on, I won't have to go through a cleanup again. Oh, thanks for watching.